Hello everyone, this is Gene Rice once again, broadcasting from Fort Hays State University. The topic for today is Communitarianism. This is lecture 2, video lecture 2 of 3, and our topic within Communitarianism is entitled Internal and External Political Challenges. The goal for today is to talk a little bit about, to review a little bit about communitarianism, and you'll see there then the definition that we have already looked at and you've probably already read, and then we'll move on to some new material. Recall that communitarianism is a political philosophy according to which personal identity involves group membership, and the state should foster maintenance of practices that advance community solidarity over perfectionist ideals and perfectionist ideals over individual autonomy. So we've fleshed that out a little bit, and we've suggested that, as the name implies, the communitarian attempts to promote the value of community, both in terms of it being a factual matter that we are always born into communities and live in communities, but also the value part of it, which suggests that our own happiness and the good of others is realized only within communities. All right, the next slide there then details a little bit about what we'll be doing in the next 2 video lectures. Our first lecture had to do with the philosophical movement and a couple of important arguments having to do with communitarianism. The lecture for today talks about both internal and external political challenges. And this is the idea here being that liberal communities, liberal countries, the United States, France, Great Britain, Canada, so forth, in the West have been promoting liberal values for hundreds of years, and there have been a lot of challenges. These challenges have arisen partly within communities, that is, just people living out their lives under liberal governments, and I will call those internal political challenges. Internal, of course, to people who live in such communities. I will term external those challenges which arose as liberal Western countries engaged with non-Western countries. So some of you may be watching this in China or in other countries that don't count as liberal, so just be careful in terms of the internal and external. I just mean internal being those political problems which arose for people who live in liberal societies, and the opposite for external. Okay, so we might mention here a few things which have arisen, which have created or given cause for external political challenges. The first, and probably the most important, is just the phenomenon known as globalization. The internet and modern technology, airplanes and so forth, have allowed countries to travel and for people to get to know other parts of the world and to affect other parts of the world in ways that would have staggered our forefathers. The second item there is the rise of international terrorism, and of course the wars that the United States and other Western countries have been involved in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places. And fourth, and we'll have reason to talk about this, the rise of China as an economic and political powerhouse, which is obviously not a Western or traditional liberal society. So those are just some of the events which have helped create some of these external political challenges. All right, we begin with internal political challenges. So again, these are issues which have arisen for the liberal political tradition because of various factors that have arisen in the liberal tradition by people who have been experiencing neutral governments and the other elements we mentioned previously for modern Western liberalism. The question there is, does the emphasis on individualism and on freedom have too many negative social and or psychological consequences for people who live within such places? There are a number of examples that communitarians will bring up. These are just a few of them. Urban crime, increasing urban crime, divorces, higher rates of divorces, and the breakdown of the nuclear family. Also, rampant consumerism. Consumerism would be the idea that happiness is achieved through consuming. And so we never have enough, even though we have more than enough already. Homogenization. Homogenization just means every place and everybody looking, acting, and feeling the same. So this destroys diversity. It lessens our chances to learn from other cultures. So, consumerism, homogenization, loneliness, and lack of participation in governments. In the United States, for example, rarely do more than half of the people who can vote actually vote in elections. In some cases, it's more like 20 or 30%. So, again, these are just some examples. This is not a complete list or an exhaustive list. But communitarianism says if you look at what happens to people and what happens to communities when they embrace Western liberalism, you see a lot of things which are not good. And these are some of the most common complaints that communitarians have for the experience that people have living in liberal societies. How could we change that, or what are some things that communitarians would suggest might change? Well, first of all, remember that for communitarians, the goal of government is not to remain a neutral referee or to remain on the sidelines, but rather to try to empower people and to empower local communities and families to achieve the good life and to promote a particular view of the good life. So these are just, again, this is not a complete list, but some examples of things that communitarians may advocate to improve the situation. First, make it harder to get divorced. Studies show that children who come from divorced families often have a harder time of it. Economically, women have a much harder time of it when they get divorced, so forth. We ought to promote local standards for architecture, for purchasing locally, and so forth. So sometimes you may have heard the McDonald's, everything becoming like McDonald's, right? And everyone having the same Walmart grocery stores. And so local communities begin to lose their particular flavor or their regional differences, and everything looks the same, right? This was then a way we might stop homogenization. Another possibility might be to build affordable housing. Again, this is studies show that people families who are able to rent in decent housing or to buy affordable housing tend to do better, and children tend to do better in such environments. Family-friendly work environments. In many Western countries, there aren't a lot of protections for women who become pregnant or fathers who want to take time off work because their children are young and in school. And so we might try to improve the work environment for families. The second to the last item there is to allow more local government control. Some communitarians argue that federal power, that is power which is controlled at the highest level of the government, has gone too far, and that communities need to have some of their power back to set their own standards and to prevent homogenization and so forth. And the last item there is that the government ought to promote civic engagement, public engagement, and civic virtues. So being a part of community-wide cleanup projects, or helping out your neighbors by, I don't know, tending their lawn or something like that. These are examples where we might promote public engagement rather than a kind of individualism which says, I will just do my own thing. Okay, so let's look at external political challenges here. And these will, again, I'm a visual sort of person, so we'll put this up on the board visually. So the examples we were just talking about are challenges which arise within liberal societies themselves. So let's brand this liberal society L. And so some of these political issues came about internally, right? People who live in these societies saying, I feel lonely, or I feel disconnected, or my job just fired me because I wanted to take some time off to spend with my sick child or something like that. And so the communitarian said, well, there's a variety of ways we can address these internal challenges. But we also have political challenges which arise from the experience of liberal societies in the West interacting with non-liberal societies. Sometimes this is just shortened by saying Eastern societies, but of course there are non-liberal societies geographically in the western part of the world. So maybe it's better just to say non-liberal societies. We'll make this an in. And of course we react and act with non-liberal societies on trade, right? Sometimes in war, or in attempting to bring about peace. Let's see. We sometimes interact with other people on the internet or other ways of communicating. And of course, individuals may travel to other countries and so forth. And so this is not a complete list, but the idea here is that liberal societies exists on a globe, in a world, at a time when there are plenty of non-liberal societies. Communist societies, like the People's Republic of China, theocracies, like the Islamic State in Iran, and various other kinds of what would broadly be called non-liberal societies. And so as these two interact, then we come up with some challenges. And communitarianism says that there is that there are a number of challenges which liberal societies can learn from by interacting with non-liberal society. So the first example, or the first item I have down there, is just human rights. Are there such things as human rights that would serve as moral or political values that would operate over all of these cultures, right? So human rights, as we'll see in the next lecture, have become a very important political tool. And human rights come from or come out of liberal societies. And so is it right to ask non-liberal societies to promote human rights? There's a very important and good example of this going on right now in Iraq. The United States and its allies, some of its allies, overthrew Saddam Hussein in the early part of the 21st century, and immediately it became a big question as to whether we were going to enforce all the same human rights that we have in our liberal society on Iraq. Iraq was not a traditional liberal society, and so, for example, should women in Iraq have the same rights and responsibilities and freedoms that they have in the United States or in France? And so this is a very important example and one important challenge to liberal societies, because some people in Iraq and people all over the world will say, well, this is not our view. We are not a liberal society, and so our view of the proper place of a woman is not perhaps what you would see in Germany or in France. Okay. Another example of this is democracy. Should the powerful countries in the West, liberal societies, put pressure on other countries to become democratic? Again, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan ongoing have been, at least on some accounts, have been to promote things like democracy or ideals like democracy. And so communitarianism is going to ask, well, is it appropriate that we promote democracy either by engaging in war, or a lot of times we won't give money to certain countries because they're not democratic, or the United States won't. I mean, when I say we, modern liberal Western societies also tend to be some of the most prosperous in the world. So they have enormous political influence and economic power when compared with poor. Not all non-liberal societies are poor, of course, but some of them are. And so we can use the World Bank and other economic institutions to try and promote some of these things. And indeed we have in certain cases. In certain other cases, the opposite may be true. But let's go on then to the next slide, which is the first of many, which will have to do with Asian values. The communitarian approach to these political problems has gotten a lot of power from what is known as the Asian values debate. And the Asian values debate is a decentralized movement. That means it was not specifically promoted or endorsed by any particular government, but it arose out of a number of cultures, including Singapore, Malaysia, and Japan and China. And the Asian values then served as a kind of common rally point or a common political challenge to the predominant liberal approach. So if we look at the next slide, then there's a picture of Lee Kuan Yew, who was Singapore's long-serving prime minister there. And he is one of the most famous advocates, or was one of the most famous advocates for what became known as the Asian values debate. And Lee Kuan Yew served as Singapore's prime minister at a time of rapid modernization. And the economic turnaround in Singapore during his tenure was enormous. And Singapore then kind of rose to the top from many developing countries' perspectives to serve as the spokesperson for Asian values. And there's a quote there then that's from, I believe, a Newsweek article. I'm sorry that I do not have the citation there, but the quote says this: The expansion of the right of the individual to behave or misbehave as he pleases has come at the expense of orderly society. In the East, the main object is to have a well-ordered society so that everybody can have maximum enjoyment of freedoms. So there at the beginning he's talking, of course, about what he sees as the problems in the West with our emphasis on individualism and on individual freedom. What you get is people misbehaving, and people misbehaving in a way that hurts the community. And so he says, if you want to truly be free, you should have a well-ordered society. And so Lee Kuan Yew then was arguing, among other things, that Asian countries or non-liberal countries should not have to accept the Western liberal approach, and that they had their own values. Okay, so let's flesh this out, go into some more detail on Asian values. I list in the next slide 5 hallmarks of the Asian values approach. Many of these will sound familiar to you because either you are Asian or because you have already read a little bit about communitarianism, and the communitarian approach has much in common with the Asian values approach. First, Asian values emphasize the traditional family, meaning the father and mother and the children, and then the extended family. In addition to this, they emphasize the virtue of family loyalty. That is, you have a specific role to play in the family, and you should be loyal not only to that role, but also to the importance of that role in the larger family. Secondly, an Asian value is excellence in academic and technological pursuits. We could probably add there economic, right? And so many Asian countries are arguing that they have as one of their primary goals economic and technological modernization, and that is one of the things that their governments should be most concerned with. Third, Asians value, again, not all Asians would embrace this, but it's become known as the Asian values. So the value of thriftiness and hard work. Fourth, sacrificing individual freedoms for the good of the family, the corporation, or the society. And lastly, to emphasize the fact that humans are born into social networks, families, and cultures. So if you look over that list of 5 hallmarks, you'll see that many, if not most of those, are in tune with or agree with the communitarian approach. So let's take a minute to step aside from this and talk a little bit about the Asian values debate in modern China. The Asian values movement did have some of its origins in the People's Republic of China, but it also, as we've seen, arose in places outside of China. But the fact that China's exploding economic and political power really put the focus for the Asian values debate on China. And so, as we talk here, we'll be talking a lot about the People's Republic of China. But of course, we should note that not all Chinese people or all Chinese traditions would support the Asian values that we have talked about to this point. So let's talk then a little bit more. So having said that, I'll continue to use Asian values and China as interchangeable, but we should always remember that it's not literally true that all Asian countries believe in the Asian values debate, or all Chinese people are communitarians or anything like that, any more than we would say all people in Great Britain agree with their government, or all people in the United States love liberalism and individual freedom. Okay, so the next point I want to make, again, has reference to China, in part because it helps to explain why Chinese culture and the Chinese government have become a major player in the Asian values debate. And that is because one pillar, one of the major foundations of Chinese thought is Confucianism. And again, we don't have time to go into Confucianism in great depth, but Confucius was a social reformer and a philosopher who lived in the 5th and 6th centuries before the Common Era. And his writings reflect, in many ways, the ideas of modern-day communitarianism. So he would have accepted many of the principles we've been talking about when we've been talking about communitarianism. And so Asian thinkers then would in many cases be naturally drawn to some of the critiques of liberalism and Western views about government that we have been voicing in these recent lectures. I list just one or two additional elements there that may or may not be interesting to non-Easterners, to people from the West. That Confucius thought that the political structure of a good government would model the harmonious family, and the wise king would be just like the wise father, and any functional and flourishing family, a good family, needs a strong father, and so does a good and functioning state. And so each person in a family has a particular role, and so each person in society would have a particular role. And then the second item there is just that rulers should be those who exhibit the virtues and the skills needed to lead the country well. That's sometimes called a meritocracy, from the word merit. Those people who earn it or can do the job best are the ones who should lead, not necessarily the ones who can get the most votes or convince the most people that they're great. Okay, so now I erased this on the board here, but if we went back to this this interaction between the West and the East, sorry, that's a really bad S there. We have this clash, or this coming together, again, more and more as globalization, as we become more intertwined economically and in terms of communication and so forth. We have these opportunities to engage each other, to ask questions and to respond. And so the Asian values debate, again, with the United States maybe, and Great Britain and France and Germany on one side, and then China and other Asian countries on the other. And we're interacting, and the communitarian says, well, how can we respond to these external challenges? How can we respond to this claim that there are other values other than the ones in our culture which ought to be the foundation of our political system? And again, some of these questions are ones we've already raised, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them here, but we can go through them briefly. The first and largest question, of course, is just how should we engage each other politically, philosophically, culturally? What are the status of so-called human rights? Again, we're going to get to that in a later talk, so I won't go into that too much. The third bullet point, should Western countries reform their liberalism in light of these challenges, or should they throw it out? Should there be an entirely different approach? And lastly, is democracy the only or best form of government? So, for example, again, if you look at modern-day China, the People's Republic of China is a blend of Confucianism and communism, a kind of communism that's in important ways different than the communism that Westerners might associate with the former Soviet Republic, Soviet Union. But nonetheless, it's certainly not a democracy in the way that Westerners have come to understand the word democratic. And so as we continue to engage East and West, we have to ask, both sides have to ask themselves, what are their responsibilities and how do we respond to each other? So, having said that, we will end here for this lecture, and we will give you again some chance to look and think about these things some more, and to do some work outside of these lectures, and we'll see each other again shortly probably for the last of the 3 lectures, where we'll pick up on the issue of Asian values and human rights.